Welcome to Crazy Biatch Asians. This is a podcast where we discuss the issues Asians can face in the Western world with a critical mind, a bit of healthy debate, and lots of tea. Hosted by Sydney-based digital marketer Sharon Jiang and journalist Juna Zhu.
Hey. On today's episode, we're spilling more tea on inappropriate questions and statements. Yes, we are back with part 2 of this topic, so brace yourselves for another juicy chat. Unfortunately, we are still in lockdown in Sydney. In fact, the situation has only worsened over the past few weeks, so who knows when we'll be returning to a somewhat normal life. For all we know, 2022 could even be cancelled.
Exactly. And please bear with us while we continue to record our podcast over Zoom, which means the quality might not be at its best, but we're really trying to make it work during this time.
Ironic, because this episode is part 2 of our inappropriate questions and statements discussion. But in part 1, do you actually remember how we started that episode, Shaz?
Oh, I think we have jinxed ourselves for this episode because we were like, we're super lucky here because life is pretty much back to normal and we're going to bars and going out.
Major facepalm moment. Anyways, if you haven't listened to part 1, episode 17, then please do. Maybe skip our little intro about life being all lockdown free and head straight to the juicy part where we delve into inappropriate questions and statements, with some being straight out racist and others uncomfortable or irrelevant that people make in these everyday scenarios, especially the dating scene.
Yeah, so these things include: where are you from? Do you eat dogs? Or just yelling ni hao at anyone who looks Asian?
Fortunately, we have a wealth of more pressing things we didn't have the time to cover in part 1, and I think the ones we're covering today are a little more meaty, I would say.
Yes. So let's start us off with the first one. Are you an ABG? Since you're listening to an Asian-based podcast, we're pretty sure you've all heard of the term, but if not, Junes is here to explain.
According to trusty Urban Dictionary, an Asian baby girl is the following. ABGs like to hang with gangsters and wear thin, in brackets, slutty clothing. They like to jump other girls who talk shit and make out with their boyfriends 24/7, in brackets again, maybe even have sex. They usually own sidekicks who also like to text frequently. ABGs also normally have a ride or die homie, someone who is always down for them or die trying. ABGs are also known for dyeing their hair a lot, from blonde to black. They have many piercings, multiple on the ears and stomach or lip. They probably have teased hair, bangs, and have had extensions at one point or another. They could also have painted nails and tattoos. ABGs are super hot, but you would probably get jumped if you tried to hit on them. Also, they loiter and hang out past curfew.
Wow, that's a really complex definition.
I know, but I think they forgot the rave part and
Oh my
hanging
God,
around Koreatown and having those perfectly filled in eyebrows and those rose tattoos and body piercings.
Yeah.
But don't you find that there's this particular allure about the ABG stereotype, that they have a promise of having this exciting social life and living this easy and carefree lifestyle? Like, I have nothing against ABGs at all, but is my goal to look like a stereotypical ABG? Probably not. And some people might actually be very offended by this. So tread cautiously, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to add on to the definition of ABG, I would kind of describe it as a particular quote unquote subculture within the Asian community. And not every Asian girl fits that particular subculture, but you can definitely spot them by their visual aesthetics. So the way they dress, how they present themselves, as well as just their general attitude. But going back to what you said about, if you're not trying to look that vibe, if someone calls you an ABG, it's probably not the most, the best compliment to give someone. So to quote a Vice article, some Asians will actually become sharply defensive if they are associated with the term. It's a vague and blanketing thing as an easy to reach joke, with the punchline often leveraged against women. So actually, there was another quote that the writer May Tran wrote, which really caught our eyes. So ABGs are now seen as something of a meme. It's an aesthetic to wear ironically or a way to describe an uninhibited friend. Have you seen the YouTube video 18 Types of Asian Girls? If you haven't, we'll pop it in our show notes below. It's a 2015 video produced by the Fung Bros, and they start the video off with the Asian baby girls. They describe them as short and sexy, and then the starter pack involves fake contact lenses, push up bra, tattooed eyebrows, highlights or dyed hair, a dragon tattoo, or like you mentioned, a rose tattoo, and will wear anything that exposes her pierced belly button.
I love this dragon and rose tattoo thing.
Yeah, as we said, it's kind of like an aesthetic, it's like a visual indicator.
I see it as kind of a parallel to someone being called a dumb blonde. And I think a
Mm.
lot of people, especially Westerners, refer to anyone female who doesn't fit into the nerdy Asian category into the ABG category. And for someone who
Mhm.
isn't striving for that facade, it can be translated as, I wouldn't say malicious, but it is hurtful. But it
Mhm.
wasn't always like this. So the history of ABGs is super intriguing. And I would love to do a whole episode on this because I think it's really important that more people become educated on the etymology of ABGs.
Yeah, you're totally right. And going back to what you said about the dumb blonde, they really are like the Asian parallel to that type of stereotype. And I actually don't personally know about the history of ABGs. I don't think I've ever looked into it. Like all I've seen are memes and just funny, like, ABG things. But I think that would definitely be an interesting topic.
Mm.
But moving on to context examples where it's inappropriate or appropriate, what do you think, Judes?
Okay, only appropriate, I think, if it's banter and it's in a light-hearted tone and if you know the person quite well.
Hmm.
Know the person quite well, as in they actually associate themselves with being an ABG, or they just find it funny that you throw around the term ABG.
Exactly. Like if you're two best friends and it's just like, haha, you're trying to go for the ABG vibe or something, like it's just friendly banter. But what do you think is inappropriate?
I think just going upright to someone, which I've actually had this happen to me, being like, "You're an ABG, aren't you?" No.
Oh my God, but you don't even have the aesthetic of an ABG. So that just doesn't even make any sense.
I don't have tattoos. I don't have tattooed eyebrows either. The only pretty much ABG stereotype quality that I do have is fake eyelashes.
Yeah, I mean, that's like one out of how many visual aesthetic cues. So that is pretty bad. How did it make you feel when someone called you that?
I was actually quite offended because I don't want to come off as looking like your stereotypical starter pack ABG. So I did correct them and be like, no, my first concert was Michael Bublé. So yes.
Yeah, that's like the complete opposite of an ABG. Michael Blue. Oh, wow. Wow. That's like the complete other end of music.
Have you ever been called an ABG? Because you are the complete opposite of one.
You know what? I've never personally been called an ABG. Going back to your point that Asian chicks tend to have two polar opposite stereotypes. So either you're the nerd or the ABG. I feel like if someone were to go around calling random Asian chicks ABGs who don't fit the brief, for example, you, when it happened to you, then they obviously aren't familiar with the aesthetic. I would really think they've misunderstood the concept. Okay, the next one is, are you an ABB? So,
Mm.
kind of a parallel to the ABG, but for the males. So, obviously, we aren't guys, but we also need to cover some topics that are relevant to Asian males every now and then, just to, be inclusive of everyone. So, since we find it one dimensional if people called us ABGs, we can only assume it's the same for guys when they're referred to as ABBs or Asian baby boys. We would honestly love to hear from you about your personal experiences. But first, let's touch on the topic, what is an ABB?
According to trusty Urban Dick again, the ABB definition is they're cute, they wear Supreme, they're probably fuckboys, but their skin is as soft as a baby's butt, and they're definitely using daddy's money and stringing you along. Okay. Basically, it's an Asian fuckboy. Asian guys are generally categorized into two categories. You're either this nerd who's great at maths and is going to be a doctor, an engineer, accounting, or something that requires a high IQ. or you're an ABB. And again, just like the girls, there is no in between. And it can be quite belittling for Asian guys who don't fall into either of these categories, and yet society only sees one or the other.
Absolutely. And it's like that mindset of you're either one or the other with no room for nuance. And I think this stereotype is definitely not as prominent as the female counterparts of the ABG. For example, if you Google image Asian baby girl, the first things that pops up is the dumb Asian party girl aesthetic, so that general look. But if you actually Google image Asian baby boy, there are a few ABB images, but mostly it's of cute Asian babies, like actual chubby kids in nappies. And I feel like that can represent the fact that Asian girls are sexualized like a lot more than Asian guys, although I think that is changing with K-pop and like Asian male heartthrobs in Hollywood. We did do 2 episodes on Asian fetish, which touches on, sexualization of Asian chicks. So check those out if you're interested. Episode 1 and 4, slight plug. But I also think this may point to the fact that females tend to be criticized more on things that relate to our body autonomy. I mean, just look at the double standard of being called a slut or females being told what to wear. And I think that feeds a lot into the ABG stereotype. And I'm like totally conscious that I've gone into ABG territory again, but I really can't speak for the male experience in the ABB. So we'd really love to hear from our audience. You can DM or email us. But what do you think, Junes?
No, I think you just summed it up really well. And again, I would love to do an episode on this too, because I feel like there is a lot more to say.
Definitely, definitely.
So, Shaz, context examples where this is inappropriate or appropriate.
I think to mirror our sentiment for ABG, it's only appropriate if it's banter in a lighthearted tone and from someone that you know quite well, if it's your close friends and you have like a rapport with them. And very much like ABG, the inappropriateness, if it's some random stranger just asking, "Are you an ABB?" with no context at all. The next one is, it's not so much an inappropriate statement, but just a concept. It's the idea of you don't look Asian because of certain Asian features like the eyes, or the issue of how Asian do you have to be to justify as Asian. So this next part, we're going to delve into a lot of biracial and multi-ethnic identity. So if you're half Asian, quarter Asian, how do you sort of fit within this community, I suppose? So we actually have quite a confronting and funny story. I think in hindsight, it's just, It has to do with the idea of like Asians having slightly upturned eyes, that type of stereotype. Back when Sydney wasn't in lockdown, Juno and I really took advantage of going out to bars. And this guy came up to us and he was asking about us, like, what are your names? What do you do? Mind you, we kind of have fake names when we go out because we don't want to give our identity away. So we're saying, we are X and Y, we work in digital content, and somehow we landed on the topic of the podcast. And we didn't want to give him too much information, but he was really pressing us like, why don't you interview me? And I said, there is a certain community that we talk to, and you have to fit a certain criteria in order for us to interview you. And he said, and why is that? And we said, well, we have a podcast that relates to Asians. And he goes, well, I'm Asian, and like pulls his eye up. So when people put their fingers near their temples and they like pull their eyes up so they look slanted. And he did that.
When that happened, my jaw just dropped. That is a major red flag.
It was really confronting. I think at the time we were like, wait, what just happened? But now in hindsight, that was so inappropriate.
Off of this, I understand that it's probably difficult to differentiate between people of other ethnicities, but you don't go around to every Caucasian person asking why they don't have blonde hair and blue eyes.
And I think it's also the idea of why does every Asian need to have upturned eyes? Like that, not everyone's going to have those features. It's a stereotype. And how many billions of Asians are there?
And then there's this other issue. Maybe your eyes don't look Asian enough to be Asian, which brings up the topic of biracial and multi-ethnic identity. It's the comment, but you don't look Asian, you look white.
Going off of this, in the article in The Independent, the multi-ethnic journalist Freedom Chevalier, wow, what a name, expresses the following. It's meant as a compliment. It's meant to boost confidence in my ability to pass. It's meant to reassure me that I possess enough of the coveted white privilege to sleep well at night. But each time I hear that, my heart breaks just a little. I know that you are telling me I don't fit your idea of someone with Asian parentage, and I know that you aren't trying to deny me my heritage, but your assumption that cultures can only look one way broadcasts your inherent bias. When you comment that I can use chopsticks great, forgive me if I don't hear the compliment.
You know what's even more shocking?
Mm.
There's even a lot of online forums with multi ethnic individuals detailing their experiences of people calling them out because they're not Asian enough to be a victim of or have a voice in the current anti Asian hate crimes, which is absolutely appalling.
Oh, that just really saddens me because I think the Asian community should really come together during
Mm.
times of stress, during hard times, especially during the anti Asian hate crimes. And these instances, even if they're not numerous, do show us that the whole us versus them mentality can and sadly does exist. I feel like different story if someone who possesses no Asian blood identifies as being Asian to gain social standing. Because I think in popular media that has become an issue. For example, white people are getting plastic surgery to look like K-pop stars because K-pop is trendy. But that's like a whole other issue. If you're multiracial and you have Asian heritage somewhere in your genetics, then you should totally have a voice in the Asian community. You should definitely have a say.
Yeah, it's a time when we should all be rallying together, not competing against each other on how Asian you need to be.
Oh my God, totally.
There's also a great YouTube series by half Japanese actress Katie Malia called Almost Asian. And it's not a recent one, but it's still extremely valid. So each of her episodes touches on things unique to the mixed race experience, like the intersection of exoticism and white privilege, and feeling belonging in a group where you don't look the part. And there's this
Mm.
one specific episode titled Audition, where she tackles the acting industry, where it involves a scene of Malia trying to make herself look more Asian by taping
Mm.
the corners of her eyes. So she explains that even she's tempted to bend these stereotypes in her favor so she can land a gig and find that sense of belonging. But she doesn't go to that extreme and instead calls herself out for doing it. But still, she was even tempted.
That's like a really interesting concept for her to try and make herself look more Asian so she can fit the part. I
Mm.
think I'm gonna like check out this series because it sounds pretty enlightening. But going off of this, so when we were writing for this section, I thought of this idea that would be interesting for sociologists to perhaps look into. So the idea is take two multiracial twins, so parents are Asian and Caucasian, but one child possesses more Asian features and the other has more Western features.
Mm.
Will their experience in the world be different? For example, will the white looking one have more white privilege but be shunned by the Asian community and vice versa? So then I Googled it, and lo and behold, there is a great SBS read where this exact situation happened to a family. Imagine this: mum is Malaysian Indian, dad is Caucasian. The son twin looks like the dad with light skin and grey eyes, while the daughter looks like the mum with dark hair and darker skin. So, writer Sharon Vergus, who is also the mother in this piece, talks about an incident where at school, a girl of black African heritage was expressing her feelings of being a minority, and she included the son in her count of white kids. So, Sharon writes, she was surprised when he told her he was biracial. No, you're not, was the firm response. He added to me later, even the other Asian kids don't think I'm half Asian. With his olive skin and hazel eyes, he could pass for Italian or Greek. Does he experience white passing privilege compared to my daughter? It's hard to judge. He's not aware of race because he's not singled out as racially different. Still, he's well aware of skin color politics. As he says, there's definitely more racism against the brown kids.
Wow. This can be an entire episode because there's just so much to unpack here. And I wonder if it's better to interview someone who is biracial or multiracial with an Asian background to tell their story.
Absolutely. I think this is something that we can't really speak to personally because we're not multiracial. So, if that's something you're really interested in hearing about down the line, we'll look at interviewing somebody who has more knowledge in this area. But we just wanted to share some of the stories and actually bring light to this issue.
The next one, you're pretty for an Asian.
I feel like you hear this quite a lot. This one is pretty self explanatory on why it's inappropriate. You're pretty is a good enough compliment. Just stop there. 2 words, that's enough. But when people package it with for an Asian, it's just so demeaning.
Oh my God, totally. It implies that Asians as a whole are unattractive and you just happen to be someone who is pretty amongst the larger ugly group. Like, what a backhanded compliment.
Exactly. And like this is not a compliment at all. And I think people who do accept this as a compliment doesn't realize what a disservice it does to his or her Asian sisters and brothers. It is 100% not a positive thing because you shouldn't have to bring down other people to make yourself look good. Like you said, it implies that your Asian sisters and brothers are unattractive, but you're like, oh no, I'm the pretty one out of this, so that's okay. But it's not.
It's so saddening. So, appropriate context, there is none.
Yeah.
And inappropriate context, don't ever say this. Just take it out of your vocabulary.
It's now time for CBA College. Don't worry, we won't keep you here for hours lecturing you about geometry and calculus. Instead, both of us will be sharing our most interesting fact of the week so you actually walk away from this podcast having learnt something. So, Juna, hit me.
So let's rewind back a few weeks ago when I dropped a fact on how Asian men specifically like to grow their one fingernail extra long. Yes.
Yes.
So let's take this to the extreme. There's this guy called, I'm so sorry if I butcher your name, Shrinder Chalal. He's from Pune in India. He now holds the Guinness World of Records for the longest fingernails. In 2018, he finally cut them off, but basically, he grew his fingernails on his left hand for 66 years.
Oh.
So the reason that he grew his fingernails was because when he was 14, he got told off by his teacher for accidentally breaking his long nail, and the teacher told him that he would never respect the value of long nails. To prove his point, he decided to not cut his nail for the next 66 years on one whole hand. And then he flew to the US in 2018 to finally chop them off. And the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Times Square in New York even has them on display.
Oh.
So, how long did they get?
Yes, please tell us.
According to the Guinness World of Records, his nails grew to 197.8 centimeters, or if you go by feet, it was 6.5 feet long. So when you combine the length of all his nails on that one hand, it came to 909.6 centimeters, which is about the length of a London bus. Yeah. So he actually married, he has 2 children, he worked professionally as a photographer with these long ass fingernails, but it actually did take a toll on the health of his hand. So he can actually not open his left hand from a closed position or flex his fingers.
Oh my God. You know when people say Asians are dedicated and hardworking? This is what they mean. This is dedication to the core. Also, he worked as a photographer. How do you hold a camera? Like, how?
The camera. I don't understand. I do not understand.
God. Okay, that was a good one. I love that one.
Okay, your interesting fact.
Okay, I have a question for you. When you think of fashion shows, what comes to mind, Juna?
Ooh, like New York Fashion Week or Paris Fashion Week. You know what? It's a scene in Sex and the City when they go to the fashion show and they're sitting front row, dressed in Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Gucci, the lot.
Okay, so you're thinking like luxury fashion houses, sitting front row, everyone really stylish. Okay, there's a hotter fashion show than Paris Fashion Week or Victoria's Secret, or any of that. Enter stage right, Crustacean Fashion Day, where
Huh?
crabs are dressed up and judged on their looks. Yeah, so crabs. The pincer animal lives in the sea, the stuff that some people eat, crabs.
What?
So, some notable outfits include traditional Chinese dress, traditional wedding attire, so Chinese wedding attire, or more trendy looks with ribbons and sequins. And there's also a separate category that judges hand painted crabs. So, if you're an artsy person, you might want to enter into that section.
This is so absurd.
So, according to Weird Asian News, this crab fashion show takes place in eastern China's Jiangsu province and has been part of the city of Huai'an's annual traditions for at least 70 years. So, it's been going on for quite some time, and the point of the festival is to celebrate the harvest of hairy crab and also attract interested buyers into the area. It's a bit of a commercial type thing, bit of an economics type thing, but also who wouldn't like a fashion show with crabs, eh? Oh my god. Oh my
And
god. No.
reinforcing, we're talking about crabs who live in the ocean, not any other crabs that you might be thinking of.
Yeah, no, no, not the type that you definitely don't want that causes itchiness down there. Not that.
Do they
Yeah.
eat the crabs after they've painted them?
Okay, so this is the interesting thing. The contestants for that year's Crustacean Fashion Day gets to live another year because it's thought as bad luck to eat the participant. The reward for the dressed up crab is they get to live.
Oh my god, wow, what a great reward.
Get this. This is the funniest part of the whole thing. I mean, as if it can get any funnier. So as new technology develops, there are more and more add-ons to this festival. For example, a drone now flies contestants to the runway. So I saw a picture and legit two crabs dressed up like in a skirt or whatever are strapped to the bottom of a drone and it's flying in midair. Like honestly, Google image this because your eyes will thank you.
This has been the greatest lockdown entertainment. If I've learned anything from 2021, it's that crabs compete.
In a fashion show.
Okay, Shaz, I asked you the same question in part one, but out of all the inappropriate questions and statements from this episode, which one do you despise the most?
Definitely the "you're pretty for an Asian" one. I just hate that question so much because it's so unnecessary and you've actually wasted your breath in saying the final three words. You could have just saved time and effort for yourself. What about you?
It's not a statement or a question, but it's just the act of someone pulling your eyes outwards. But it's
Yeah.
also like, did you ever grow up at school with people singing like ching chong and then they'd like pull their eyes at you?
Oh, what the hell?
I like vaguely remember this stuff happening, but it's just like children playing around. But still, like
Oh,
in an adult context, and you growing up thinking that it's okay to do that, it's not.
we didn't even mention like ching chong and all that because we just literally thought no one does that anymore. And
Yeah.
it's so obvious that it's wrong. But maybe in part 3, we'll mention ching chong.
Anyways, so if you'd love to hear more from us, please subscribe to Crazy Biatch Asians on your favorite podcast app. And if you've got a sec, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so we can keep going.
And if you like watching your podcast, you can also find us on YouTube under the same name. And if you want a daily dose of the best Asian memes, then just head to our Instagram at CrazyBeArchAsians. We also want to thank our one fan on Patreon. So thank you so much for supporting us. But if anyone else wants to help us through monthly donations, that would really be a massive help to us. So you can head to our Patreon page at CrazyBeArchAsians. That's all linked down below in the show notes.
Please stay safe, everyone. Chat soon, gang.
Bye!